I'm Juho Juutilainen. I'm a designer at Eficode, and for me, it is a bit difficult to answer the question, what do you do for a living? Because I do kind of lots of things. For example, I help our customers in figuring out what kind of services they should start doing, what kind of new services they should implement. So basically coming up with our customers about business ideas, about new services. Another thing that I help our customers with is to design the actual services, basic UX design, service design related things. And then I also help our customers to get better at designing services. And that's like briefly saying that what is the thing that I do for my living. And today I'm going to talk to you about DesignOps. But before I get to the actual DesignOps part, I would first like to tell a few things about why design is important and what basically, in theory, the creation of digital services is like. What's typically done. So as a background information, it's really shocking to realize that actually in the S&P 500 index, which is quite good list of the 500 biggest and most important companies in the US, basically, that on that list, the average age of companies has decreased really dramatically. In the 50s, the average age of the companies there was about 60 years. But then, about 5 years ago, it was about 20 years. And that is, of course, partially due to the technology companies like Alphabet or Apple and like getting more prominent place in the US economy. But it is also significant mark that companies that are not creating some new ways of doing their business, they are not doing that well on that market, and I would even argue that in global level also. And then the second point I'd like to make in the beginning is that based on few studies, 3 that I know of that are have really large sample base, the finding is that those companies which are good at design, that have high design maturity, those do better than the rest. In average, in US, from 2005 and 2015, it was found that the companies that can be evaluated to do business better, to do design better, really increased their stock value twice over the rest of the companies that were not that good or in design or didn't have that high design maturity. And another, perhaps even more important finding is that in US around 2012 and 2017, if I remember right, the companies which were seen to have a good design maturity really did about 2 times better in their revenue growth than the other companies evaluated in the same sectors. And this in itself very much highlights the point of why the design maturity of our organization, why it really matters and why it makes a tremendous difference. And before going to talking about DesignOps, I'd like to tell a few words about design and doing digital services in general. I would argue that design, it isn't some secret sauce that you add to the equation. So basically, I would say that it is something a bit different. To get to address this, I would like to first say a few words about how digital services are created in theory. Of course, the actual process varies company by company, organization by organization. So in theory, in an organization, you have a portfolio of different kind of services and products. Some of those are digital, some of those are physical. And you have your customer's journey, or some prefer to call it the operational value stream. And you have different kind of products, services, perhaps processes that you do to implement that journey or operational value stream. And when you are creating a new service, you are in essence, you are creating an extension to that journey, or you are starting to do the journey in a bit different way. Or then you try to reach another kind of customers. In essence, you are like doing things in your portfolio differently or expanding it. And in the beginning, you have a basic idea of the concept, what you are about going to do. Then basically you break it down to epics or features or some other like manageable parts that you design. A couple at a time. You do it in releases or you do it like continuously, whichever way. But basic idea is that you don't design the service upfront and then just do it. But basically you take few parts of it, do an MVP with it, and then continue designing it after you start to get feedback. And then you have the developer teams. Typically, they start to take the epic or feature and start to develop it in manageable parts. And then they release it continuously, utilizing DevOps practices. And that's basically how most of the product development goes when you are doing your own products and you are not utilizing some third-party SaaS platform or something, but when you do services by hand. And why it is so difficult and why it is such a hassle sometimes? Well, to me, one of the like big things is that there are just so many stakeholders. You have, for example, you have some business developers, UX designers, you have some architects, you have some product owner, you can have some portfolio steering, you have marketing, you have service business, you have tons of stakeholders, which not always are very aligned on what you want to get done or what you want to achieve with as a service. And even more importantly is that there's tons of methodologies, processes by these stakeholders, guidelines that govern how you should be doing the service. And it can be really a mismatch and really difficult conversation that should we now focus on this or should we then focus on that? And it really can be really complicated the way you do services. And basically, like the classic like DevOps guideline is that you should increase your the speed from the getting do it in smaller pieces, the service, get it to live in sooner to get the feedback more faster. And it is really good guideline. But the basic problem with that is that moving fast, it is only like half of the equation. It's not enough just to get things done quickly. On top of that, you should be doing things that create value. So if you don't have mechanisms in that really ensure that what you are doing next, that it will actually create value, it will make people's life better, it will make a company's bottom line better, then you are really just like missing a big part of the potential of what you do. And for me, this perhaps is the most important slide in this whole presentation, because it really explains what is the value of design on a big scale. It is that it helps your organization to get more done, to get more value out with the same effort. It's not a secret sauce. It's not something that you pour on top of the services, but it is basically being better at thinking what you should be doing and how. And when you start to get better, when you start to think how you scale that doing to the whole enterprise, it's really important that you don't start with drafting new KPIs. You don't start with drafting the workflows, how things should work. All of those things are something that you probably should have in the end or in some phase. At least hopefully you have the KPIs in place as soon as possible. But basically, when you want to get better at design, when you want to get more impact for the effort you spend, then you really should start to facilitate the discussion in the organization and start to ask the big questions, the really existential questions about design. And there are about 2 times more of the big questions. I am now going back through 4 of them. And perhaps the most important of these all is that you start to ask that what is the meaning and role of design? Why are we doing design in this organization? And how can it help us to maximize the impact of our efforts? Some practical talking points are, for example, that can we as designers, as design practitioners, can we help our organization to find new business opportunities? Or then on a more concrete or more practical level, should we be doing user testing for all of the concepts before we get go ahead for the project? Or should we do user testing before we take things to development? Which are really important questions. You should be connecting to your key stakeholders and start to have this as round table discussions as possible, or just discussions if you can't get people involved in one round table. And one of the tips, like to get that discussion going, is to start to talk about the cost of piloting. So designers can help, and design methodologies help you to fail faster and a lot cheaper. Because when you kill bad ideas during conceptualization, it costs only a fraction of what it costs after you have spent resources on designing it, developing it, launching. At first, there are cases where you start to continuously develop something for a year and start to really get baffled, like, why is this not working? Well, it can turn out that it is an idea that should be killed a lot earlier. And one of the also key discussions is to start to talk about what good looks like. And it really concentrates on the discussion you have with business and with techs. And I really like this design thinking's model of desirability, feasibility, and viability to really concretize what good is about, because it really tells each stakeholder, like, okay, this is what we concentrate on, and yes, what they do is also difficult. And what's best in this model, although it's not perfect, is that it is really easy to connect the different measurings that you can take to the model. And it really is a good vehicle for discussing with, for example, text that, okay, why the usability as such, why it matters, why it could be as important thing as the scalability, because if the thing doesn't work, we don't have anything that we need to scale, for example. And this is really good way of getting common understanding also what is design roles and why it is important, where it actually really can help. And this, on the other hand, then connects very well to the discussion of how design connects to what others do. And like one of the really industry classical discussions is that how the product owner, architect, and service designers, how they can together start to build on their roadmap and take it further. How they really can get things validated as quick as possible, so that taken to get her see that things can be made fail early enough. Or then the another classical discussion is that how UX designers and developers should collaborate. That is really important discussions also. And one tip to this discussion is that it's really good to talk about the cost of learning. Because at worst, when organizations do lean startup, they spend a couple of months building something, then they start to measure, does it work, and then they learn based on that. And at worst, the few months effort, the only learning that you can take that, no, it didn't work at all, we not really have even enough information on why it didn't work. Design thinking and design related methodologies in general, they emphasize that you really should be you should do tens or at least multiple prototypes in that time that it does to take an actual MVP. You can start to create new business ideas and prototype them with really, really easy prototyping and testing. And you can test multiple of ideas in the same time. It's really easy and it's really cheap to learn that way. Then, one of the critical things for the velocity is that how do you keep everything coherent? Because typically you don't have only one product in your organizations. You have multiple products. On practice, they can be on multiple platforms, and some of those can be even like cloud or SaaS platforms where you can't really affect things that much. And then you have all the physical touch points and other services that the customers are receiving. So how can you keep the customer experience consistent? Should you use a design system to keep everything at least looking coherent? That is one of a few of the big questions you have, because coherence is to standardization to some extent. It is something that is required for scaling. And to get that discussion going on, it's really important to talk in a language that techs and business understand. For example, to techs, you should say, for example, that, hey, design system, it is a dependency and it should be pushed to the platform. End of story. And when you talk about the business stakeholders, you probably should be talking that doing the front end from scratch to all applications is just too expensive, period. End of discussion. And like a practical tip also is that you can't get everything to work at once. You need to prioritize what you do and get your hands dirty and really to see what works before you can start really to standardize and scale the way of working to people. And when you are trying to get resources for that, it's really, really important that as often as possible, change the talking from the cost saving to about creating value, because that is what you should help the organization to do better. When doing design ops or improving the design maturity, there's the biggest danger and the biggest mistake that can be done is that somehow design is thought to be something that designers do. And it's something that's owned by design or designers. And it's only done when we are developing services or designing services. Now, really good example of, or actually two examples of why it is not so, is that when you take Fuji film as an example, they transformed from a film company to a digital company in a really short period. And when I look back to it, for me, there's two things that really stand out. One of them is that actually they were quite good at design. They didn't call it design. For example, the person leading the film group's development back in the old days, he had an advisory group of professional photographers. So he really connected to the end users and really started like doing it right. And then the second thing is that when the film industry started and the classical film, like people started to use the digital devices, Fuji really diversified really strongly to multiple different businesses. Not all, many of them were even pretty far from what they were doing. So they were boldly experimenting different things. Meanwhile, Kodak, they stuck pretty much with their business and just started to do digital cameras. And in the end, it turned out that Kodak basically, in essence, bankrupted, and their brand basically was sold, so that now some consumer products are done with the brand, but basically it almost went belly up in the 2012. Meanwhile, Fujifilm has been increasing its stock values very rapidly and continuously for the late years. And for me, that tells that they were just better at thinking things from the business design point of view. And DesignOps it's really important, and it really helps you to create services better, and services that make an impact on your bottom line and make impact on the lives of your customers. But really, what's even sometimes more important is that you drive the culture in your organization, where the emphasizing with the customer and bold experimentation are keys, so that you really have the kind of culture where people are confident and trustful enough that they can start to do something, knowing that everything is fine as long as they fail relatively fast enough. And it's encouraged, and you connect with your end users. For example, Fuji's Future Challenge, really good example of that. And you also start to empathize with your customers very strongly, and the well-being of your customers really is a thing, so that you really start to think that how can we make their life better, because it helps you to make something that is relevant to them, and that in itself will be relevant to your bottom line. And in essence, what this all boils down to, in my opinion, is that the secret of not dying young and to be long in the business and to be strong in the business is that as an organization, you are able to reinvent yourself or invent the future. That is somewhere where DesignOps helps you a lot, but where you also need the design thinking culture. And that is very central thing, and other of the two things that I would like you to take away from this talk. So the two main things being, one, DesignOps is very much about helping your organization to create impact, to really design things better and fail faster. And design thinking, it's basically the culture, or boils down to the culture where people should and start to empathize with end users and really boldly experiment and go to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juho. If you guys have any questions to Juho, we now have some time left to have some questions and answers here. If I can kind of start here, I would like to ask, what do you think if you have a small product team, how long might take to kind of transform this product team in this DesignOps way of working team? or if you think about a bigger organization, how long it might take for a sizable company to make this cultural change?
Yeah, for single team, it's really really easy. You can start it in the day 0, and in a couple of months you really are much better at it, as long as you get all the stakeholders committed. And actually, that getting the stakeholders committed is what really makes it take more time in a big enterprise, because really you need to have those first victories and be able to really make life better also for your enterprise stakeholders, and getting them on board and starting to get them to start to implement design thinking, for example. It can take some time. So on a big organization, few years is really nothing out of the ordinary if there is strong inertia for doing things in certain way. But I very much would like to say that also the big first wins in a big enterprise, also you can have them in a half year, for example, because it's no secret that is also one of the reasons why we talk so much about design systems, because it really is something very concrete that really you can see in the bottom line very fast, and it makes everybody's life much better. So there are many quick wins you can do. But to get to the level where you can start to reinvent your organization and everybody is your design maturity is top notch, that takes time.
Good, thanks. We have a couple of comments here. Tuuli comments that thank you for the talk, Juho. This is such an important topic, and I wish more businesses understood how much they can benefit from design. And then Mikko comments also, one pitfall with doing prototype in a week versus building something for a few months approach is forgetting the weak part. Way too much time gets invested in the prototype and it ends up way too high fidelity. That sounds really...
Yep, being there, it is. And it's really it's really good to have a guidelines in your organization how to do it. And so that you really stress to that it's more important to do 3 iterations with really quick and dirty prototype than to do one well. And you need to communicate the big wins with based on the really crappy quick hack prototypes also, so that people get the feeling that it doesn't need to be polished. Because in some, and also I'd like to say that in some organizations there might be a drive that it needs to look good so that people get committed that it really works. But there are some hacks around it, but the sooner you get to quick and dirty, the better.
That's really familiar topic. Don't do too high fidelity prototypes. They then get kind of bought and people don't want to change them anymore. That's one. Okay, then we have a question from Leon here. Are there some recommended metrics that seem common across teams that can be evaluated to measure the DesignOps journey and maybe predict its success?
Yeah, well, there's a couple. Perhaps it can be a bit tough sell that you can really use qualitative metrics, but design maturity is a good metrics. There's tons of different, about 5 that I know of, different methods of doing the design maturity, basically survey. And that's really good tool because you can do it once per quarter, well, a couple of times a year at least. And then about the hard facts, then of course the amount of things you kill before going to forward is really good. But typically you don't have that reporting in your backlog built in or on the platform, which is unfortunate because it doesn't highlight so much the value. but you could use, of course, the velocity as such and the amount of like changes because bad requirements, like as a good metrics, because design should also help to get the real requirements earlier.
Yes, that's cool. One example of a good sort of survey to kind of measure your design ops maturity is, for example, from InVision. That's quite well known, and they have done quite a large benchmark with their questionnaire, and you get a quite good idea where you are after kind of doing that.
Yeah, for both benchmarking, the InVision is probably the best.
Yeah, good. Then we have here a comment from Vili. DevOps is really also about delivering value to customer, not just release velocity. So what is the real differentiation between DevOps and DesignOps?
It's a really good question. We have a discussion with some DevOps consultants, or like lots of discussion that are those really that separate things. DevOps is perhaps more focused on the velocity and to get on the feedback loop when you get it like done, so that you get the real facts from the ops and you connect it to the design. And while design ops, it's more about trying to fail and to get it better before you get to dev. So it is, if you think that in the half you have the requirements, then design ops, it is a bit more concerned about what happens before development, and DevOps kinda what happens after. But basically you can't win with both. Both. I mean, both need to be. And for me, this is oversimplification because those two things overlap almost totally, but DevOps is a bit more about being fast, and DesignOps is a bit more about what you do. But that statement isn't completely true.
Good, thanks. We still have time for a couple of questions, and we have a question from Tuomas here. How does the design work get input from operations teams' experiences in practice, measuring how actively and in which way features are used in production, or question mark?
Yeah, at first they are not. There are those organizations which they don't really take that data or the user insight data in account. The features get pulled to the release and designed based on who yells the loudest. That's like the first case scenario. At better stage, you might have, so for example, some growth hacking oriented team, which really like deep dives into analytics and metrics, and then starts to really push some things forward just because we can see that it really needs to be done from the metrics. But basically, I would say that the good balance between the quantitative and qualitative, especially when you are doing conceptual thing, it is really important. And what I would really like to see more in the future is really that to get the metrics from the ops to the designers and the ops people, like business people, because that doesn't happen as well as it could in most places.
Thanks. Christina from Eficode also reminds us that don't miss the upcoming webinar where Juho Juutilainen will talk about creating new service concepts to transform your business. And there's also a link in the chat for sign up. And Sami Niemelä, who will be on quite soon, comments that he'll be touching these issues as well in just 2 minutes. And then we have a comment from Christopher. In design thinking, it's very common to include all relevant stakeholders, including operations, in the design thinking process.
Yeah, and I would say also that design ops also it really fails if you don't connect with the stakeholders. And that's also it is not something that should be owned purely by designers. It should be about doing design and connecting, for example, architectural design to service design to business design, for example, or UX design to software design. So it really design thinking. It really is like it is the way to do it also.
Hey, I think it's time to say warm thanks to Juho for your talk and presentation.